Hello and welcome to the first episode of Wolf Tracks, the new Daily Lobo podcast. Today, I am joined, by the way, I am John Baca, the managing editor at the Lobo.
And I am David Lynch, the editor-in-chief at the Daily Lobo.
And today we're talking about an issue that has a lot of students talking and wondering what the details are, because details are sparse, and we're going to try to clear it up, and that is the new requirement that is going to require new incoming freshmen to live on campus. And this is going to start in the fall of 2018. So, it's a little ways off, but I think this is the time to discuss the pros and cons, and that's what we're going to do today. We've got some guests coming up. We've got interviews from people who helped to write the new policy. So let's kick it off. David, what do you got?
Yeah, so I guess just to start off with, when we did... So I guess just to start things off, when the Daily Lobo wrote our initial story about the passing of the policy following last week's Regents meeting, it was last Tuesday, I believe. A lot of people that we noticed on social media who commented on the story, they had questions like how will it be enforced? For example, one of the exceptions to this new rule is that if you are a freshman who are living with a parent or guardian within 30 miles of the university, how will the university enforce that? Another comment was that a lot of students and even alumni of the university see this as just a way for them to make money, and they're really not really doing it with the students and their experiences in mind at all. So we're going to address some of those questions. We have some additional information that we were able to get after that story to answer some of those questions that you guys have, and hopefully we can get some of that cleared up for you, as well as kind of put a lot of this in perspective by looking at what other schools in the area do, and also, as we mentioned earlier, getting the perspective of UNM President Kyle Biederwolf, who joined us. So
just to get started, so the requirement is going to, so far the Board of Regents has approved it, and it's set to start to be implemented in the fall 2018 semester. But the basic premise is incoming freshmen are now required to live on campus, and there's a big but, and that is that there are several exemptions, and so why don't we go over those, because I think that might be one of the places that a lot of people don't understand how broad these exemptions really are. So you want to tell us what those exemptions are?
Yeah, so the big one that we already mentioned, that students have mostly focused on is the exception that says if you're a freshman and you live with your parent or guardian within 30 miles of the university. So pretty much 30 miles in any direction. So if you're local and graduated from an Albuquerque area high school, you're living with your parent or planning to in your first year at UNM, you will pretty much be fine. The other exceptions that, a lot of people aren't talking as much about, just because that is the one that arguably affects the most potential freshmen and incoming freshmen, are that you are 20 years old when term begins, that you have a domestic partner, that you're married, or you have children that are legally dependent on you, that you have a medical hardship that would essentially make accessing on-campus dorms tough on you. Or the last one is that you will have an undue hardship on ability to attend. And I think that's an important one to look at, because I think that does leave...
Financial hardship, right? Or is that... Did you already mention the financial?
Financial hardship too, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that's another one to mention, is financial hardship too. So I think an important point to bring up is that whilst I think some people might be looking at this as a little bit black and white as far as how the university will enforce this with incoming freshmen to live on campus, but I think an important point to be made is that it does seem like administration will be willing to work with students to think about their situations, the potential medical hardships, their financial situations. If it's going to be really tough on you to live on campus and afford it, they're going to take that into account. So they will be willing to work with students starting in 2 years to make sure that everyone's as comfortable as possible with the situation. So yeah, like we mentioned, there is a whole variety of student opinions on this. Like we said, the reaction, at least to our story on social media, was one generally of opposition to this policy, and they a lot of people just spoke from their own experiences. They even some saying that they wouldn't have attended UNM if this policy was in place when they were a freshman, saying there's no way that some people would be able to afford it. That it kind of takes away from UNM's identity as a relatively affordable school to attend. And just out of state and out of city students having the option to live on or off campus, which we will discuss a little bit later in some of the interviews we have. So just to get you an idea of one of the freshmen, just to get you an idea of one of the students we talked to and their perspective. So a big part of this, obviously, with the on-campus expenses that you have to take care of when you're living on campus is the meal plan. A lot of students say they don't want to have the meal plan, that it might be a little bit expensive, that they prefer going out to eat. So let's listen to one student who provided their opinion on that.
I think as a freshman you're required to have the meal plan, and I knew that wasn't something that I wanted to pay for because I wasn't going to be eating the food that was going to be here because I didn't think it was like the healthiest option or the best option for me. So that was like a big factor, was not wanting the meal plan. And that was a money saver.
So that was one student that gave their opinion. Another student who said he lived on campus, he actually did live on campus for his first 2 years at UNM. While he did say bring up some similar things, that the food and with the meal plan does get a little bit of expensive, he brought up another kind of aspect of living on campus, and that's the social aspect. Let's give a listen.
I don't know. I'm not stoked on it. I think it's just kind of... it's just unfortunate to force someone, because people that are going to enjoy that on-campus life, because it does take a certain personality type, I think, to like want to be around that many people and want to socialize in such a large conglomerate of students. That kind of person's already trying to live on campus and is going to live on campus, is going to make the best of it. So forcing kids that don't want that there and then also have to pay for it is just kind of sucky for the ones that weren't going to live on campus in the first place, because they already had reasons not to, because it's too expensive, or because they didn't, some people just don't like that living situation. So now they're being forced into it even though they weren't going to in the first place.
And some other students we talked to, the students who, if had this policy been implemented this year, they would have been most directly affected by it. They themselves are freshmen. Let's see what they had to say. What are you guys' thoughts on it?
I really enjoy it because I'm living on campus and I don't live too far from here, but I've been able to meet a lot of new people from interacting with like my dorm and just my housing complex. And I feel like it's an easier way to make friends because it's a big campus and you don't get to talk to everyone in every single class. So it makes you feel less isolated and you get more involved.
So a lot of people have a lot to say about this. After our initial story came out, we got an unbelievable amount of response on Facebook and Twitter. I think it was, at least so far this semester, it was the story that got the most reaction out of our readers, I think. But, and like you said at the beginning of the show, most of it was negative. Actually, I think all of the reaction was negative. Everybody was kind of flipping out about it and, saying, how could UNM do this? This is the stupidest idea ever. But I think it's also important to point out that at that point, we didn't have all of the details about all the exceptions, the exemptions, and there was just a little bit of confusion about it. It seemed like it was going to be much more strictly enforced, that they were not going to have as many options, and that they were basically just going to force everybody to live on campus. And as we found out interviewing Terry Babbitt, the head of enrollment here at UNM, that is not quite the case. It's a lot more flexible than we initially thought, and I think it's really important that we stress that, because that is a big part of it. And as you'll hear, once all the exemptions are stacked up, I kind of started thinking about the fact that it's actually going to be pretty easy to get out of living on campus if you don't want to. There's so many exemptions that if you really want to go to UNM, but you are dead set on living off campus as a freshman, there's going to be a way that you can do that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, they like I said, not only will they work with incoming freshmen to make sure that all parties involved are as comfortable as they can be with their situations, but yeah, I mean, with these other exemptions and the other information that we got when we talked to Terry, I think that students will see that there will be a lot of ways that a lot of other factors that come into play that will possibly allow them end up with them, even if you're out of state, with the option of living off campus.
I think there was, I don't remember if you mentioned it, but there was another exemption that I thought was interesting, and that was a cultural sensitivity. So the way I understood it was that if there's something culturally that's important in your life that you need to have your own space, like say you're a Buddhist and you meditate for an hour every day and you need total silence. I'm almost positive that if you went to them and said, I can't live in the dorms because I can't have my own space, it's extremely loud, I can't do my meditating, which is an important spiritual practice for me, I think that you would fall under that exemption. Another example I thought of, we have a lot of Native American students, and a lot of people come from reservations, and say you want to remain living on a reservation nearby and you want to commute. I think that's probably going to be able to fit into this cultural sensitivity exemption. So, on top of if you come to them and can prove to them that you genuinely cannot afford to live on campus and that living off campus in your own place would be cheaper, they'll let you do that. If you want to live with a family member and it's within 30 miles of the university, which is essentially all of Albuquerque and much of the surrounding area, that falls under one of the exemptions. The cultural sensitivity thing, that's very broad. If you have any kind of issue, you have social anxiety and you just feel like you can't share a room with someone you don't know, and it really, it's a serious issue for you, I'm pretty sure that they would work with you on that and would let you live off campus if that's going to be a huge deal for you. So it's actually pretty flexible. And I think after we listen to this interview with Terry Babbitt that David did, we'll have a much better idea of what they had in mind with this and what they hope to accomplish and how it's really going to affect the students now and the students in the future. So should we listen to that interview?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get started on it. So one of the things that we did mention in our initial story after the Regents passed this policy last week was that what Terry Babbitt presented to the Regents as part of the research that his team gathered in pushing this proposal and this initiative is that 55% of students that they talked to, out of students that they talked to, 55% said that they would still have attended UNM. Now, looking back at a lot of the response that story got on social media and on our website, a lot of people seem to question how can they possibly justify that number, essentially almost half the university leaving. So we cleared that up with Terry, and he was able to provide an explanation as to which number are. He was able to provide an explanation as to which population of students that they actually surveyed to take into account for the research for this proposal.
Right, where that number came from, basically.
Yeah.
When we originally reported on that in our story, we didn't quite get get that number right. The number is correct, but the way they reached that number, we weren't completely clear on. So we had to get some clarification from Terry, and here it is.
So really the group, out of our whole freshman class last year, 3,327 students, there's only 350 that would have been impacted by this policy. Okay. In other words, they're outside of the 30-mile radius, they're not above the age exception. Exactly, so they chose to live off campus. So that's the group we surveyed who said 55% of those said, I would have still come to UNM. And so that number is really about 200 of the 350. So then we extrapolated that further, and about 20 to 21% said they wouldn't have come. 21 said they're not sure. So we got to the number of students who may not come by splitting those two numbers, taking the full number that said they wouldn't come, and then the ones who said they might, and splitting it. So essentially that's how we came up with, okay, on the high end, it could impact about 100 students. But that's before exceptions.
Right.
So if we applied the liberal exception policy that we're promoting, where affordability, cultural sensitivity, medical, it's down. That's where we come up with the kind of the final 50 student impact, roughly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so really, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, probably just a handful of students.
That's exactly it. I mean, because the maximum number was 350, and we said, okay, we don't know if that's 200, we don't know if that's 250. The fact is, we need to we need to ask them directly so we know what we're looking at. So yeah, I think it's the university doesn't want to lose even one enrollment, and from part of my reason for representing what I do on this task force was to ensure that we protected enrollment as much as we can. The admissions office reports to me they don't want to lose one person. So good communication, automatic type exceptions that can be applied. Those are essential part of this implementation.
So essentially, as you heard Terry say there, by their estimate, from the research they gather and talking to these students who would have been affected this year had the policy been already implemented, the university would have only lost 50 students. So that means 50 students would not have attended UNM at all. So just to put that into basically fiscal figures and monetary figures for the university, when you add up the cost of attendance for undergraduates at the University of New Mexico, according to the UNM's website, taking transportation into account, room and board, all that good stuff, that essentially adds up, all that per student adds up to about $20,200 per year. So multiplying that by the 50 students that the university would have lost this semester, that's about $1 million total dollars that the university would have lost.
And that's including cost of living on campus. Okay, so if we assumed that these are 50 students who would have preferred to live off campus, but they don't fall under any of the exceptions, so they would have been forced to live on campus, then they would lose out on $1 million having them live on campus. But what's the amount that they would lose just in tuition from those 50 students, since those 50 students would have preferred to live off campus to begin with? If we look, what do we say? $9,000 per year in tuition times 50. So looking at almost 500 grand. Wait, is that right?
I'm going to get the actual number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So taking into account that these 50 students who said that they would not have attended UNM had this rule been in place, they would have enrolled and they would have paid tuition and for textbooks. And we just did the math, and that comes out to about $8,000 a year. So $8,000 a year per student, and 50 students that they would have lost is about $400,000 that the school would be losing out on, with those 50 students going elsewhere, going to a totally different school. So it's not a small number; it's a pretty big number. And considering that UNM is already in some financial issues, already having some budget constraints and having to hiring freeze and just not getting the tax money that we've been getting in the past few years, that $400,000 makes a difference. So it's not nothing. So what's the next question that you asked Terry?
So the next thing we asked Terry was when exactly UNM and his team had been really seriously, or basically how long they've been planning this initiative, researching data, and really taking it as something serious that could actually happen. And, because I think something that a lot of people might initially think when reading this story or looking at this story is that, well, it's a good time for the university to implement this policy because they can get this money that they might not be getting otherwise in some times where UNM obviously faces some financial hardships with its budget crisis going on. But I think what Terry had to say will shed some light on that, and I think it's pretty interesting what he had to say with how long this discussion has been, at least being a seed that's been growing over the years.
Well, President Frank started talking about it some time ago. Meaning more than a year ago. The regents have brought it up. It's several regents had this as an idea that would be good for the institution. So that's probably the impetus for this most recent work and 8 months of pretty intense work. The idea has been brought up by student affairs, who are responsible, for student life on campus years ago. Several years ago, there was a proposal and analysis, and the capacity just wasn't there. Before we had the agreement with American Campus Communities that built the 2 new residence halls, the bed space was half of what it was. It's probably 2,000 beds. And the analysis was there's not room. There's not 300 beds extra, there's not enough space. So that kind of always killed the discussion at the capacity phase. But with the partnership, the capacity did become available, at least it was thought. So a much more intense effort really kicked off last fall, about a year ago, to analyze the different pieces in a progressive manner.
So the next thing we asked Terry is, obviously the students are going to be the ones that are directly affected by this, specifically the students who will be freshmen in 2 years. So the associate students of UNM, the undergraduate student governing body of UNM, basically took it upon themselves to gather student opinions and basically ask them, had you been in this situation a couple years ago, or had you been freshmen this year while this policy was already implemented, would it have affected your decision? What are your thoughts of it? And so ASUNM essentially came out with a statement, and they presented this at the Regents meeting where this was passed, and they said, we actually opposed this policy. So we asked Terry how much weight was given to that recommendation, and here's what he had to say. So how much weight was given to that recommendation?
I think a lot of weight. I think that the student discussions we had were very good, civil. I think I learned a lot, and I hope that housing did as well. But the real issues that we tried to hit head on that we knew would be issues, access for students who may lack the affordability with housing, limiting enrollment because people want to come here to have that choice of where they live. Those are 2 really big issues. I think those were the students' biggest concerns. Many of the students lived in housing. They would stand up and support it. But, making somebody decide where they have to spend their money to live, it's never an easy decision. And I talked to many groups that it was difficult, it was a difficult thing to try to sell them on. And some minds, I think, were changed because of the exceptions, and some just, you're not going to change their mind about where they should spend their money. So I think the student concerns about infrastructure was kind of the third component, access, and then is it going to impact enrollment, were legitimate. And I think the timing issue, listening to the students, more time to implement policies about what kind of activities are we going to have on campus? How are we going to enhance the residential community? How will the exceptions be implemented that I think you had mentioned before? So all those things were important, and I think this gives us more time to do it right and have a student voice. But clearly, I think the students were listened to in that regard.
So the next thing we talked to Terry about was, we asked him, well, you guys, the team surveyed students and got their opinions, but obviously another big party that is has a lot to say about that whole process when it comes to freshmen's decisions where they want to attend college, should they live on or off campus, is their parents. Some parents might be concerned about their students living off campus, especially if they're from out of state and they're not quite sure about the city they're going to. So here's what he had to say concerning that.
We didn't survey parents in this recent discussion. We've done different surveys back in years ago with parents. They're more anecdotal, and we had a situation this year actually when I was in the middle of these these deliberations where a freshman just turned 19 years old. All of our freshmen, by the way, are very traditional age, 18 and a half years old age. But he became involved in a situation off campus where there was a gunfire and people were seriously hurt, and they were from a small community in the southeast part of the state, and they were rallying. Parents were talking to me. We support an organization there that funds scholarships, and we match. They were partially blaming, why are we letting a 19-year-old come here and live over across Gibson? It had a personal impact on me. Several people hurt seriously. Lives may have been ruined forever. I don't really know, but it took some personal conviction with me to really evaluate, what is it right for us to let someone live, in places that may not be as safe, or is it better for them to, have to live on campus if they can afford it and we can accommodate them. So that's where the parent thing really came into more of a personal situation, I guess.
All right. So yeah, originally in our original story, we had a quote from Terry about an incident, and we were never able to clarify what the incident was that he was talking about, and that's the incident that he was talking about. So that's the clarification on our original story. So from here, what was the next thing that you guys discussed?
Yeah, so here we go on to obviously discussing how this factors not only in the short term after this policy implemented, but essentially what are the long-term goals and how could this policy help the university long-term in 5, 10, 15 years? Here's what he had to say about that.
The president and the Board of Regents, it's not just really one more than the other. No one has really pushed this we've got to do this as an initiative. Destination university, people have talked about that. I like us being the University of New Mexico being a flagship university that is well respected in that role. It adds more value to all of our degrees from here. It's just strengthens our position in higher education. I think that's important. And a vibrant residential community is a piece of that. It's not the end all, believe me, because I heard from more than one student who commute, and they drive from Moriarty, one of them, and said, look, I'm more involved. I'm doing just as well. They wanted to make sure we weren't devaluing the commuting population. I said, absolutely not. That's why we have the rule 30 miles where she lived. You automatically can make that commute. And we're never going to devalue that. And actually, with this residential initiative, we may emphasize commuter success and support more. But it was just brought home the point. What we already knew is there are a lot of students who commute. We're still allowing that. It's an automatic exception, and we're going to make sure they know we value that. We're not saying, living on campus is better. You're better if you live on campus, and you'll do better. It's just not the absolute case.
So that's something that we've been hearing a lot about is making UNM a destination university and a flagship university. I already believe that UNM is a flagship university, so I don't think that necessarily this is going to do anything in that regard, but making it a destination university is a big thing, part of President Frank's 2020 plan. Adding new amenities, basically bringing things to campus that new students care a lot about, which is, nicer facilities, a really nice gym, stuff like that, that's going to bring people from out of state to UNM. And, I have some issues with this whole theory. And we're going to talk more about that in future podcast episodes. I have a feeling that, if we go too far down that road and, tuition rises too much, we're going to start, going away from what UNM has always been, which has been a state school for in-state students who don't have a ton of money but can still afford to get a great education. And so that's definitely an issue that I'm going to be watching very carefully as they start, investing more and more money on new projects and improvements to the school. How much is that going to affect tuition? How much more expensive is UNM going to become? Because a destination university is going to cost more. That's just a fact. And, all of these projects are going to cost money, and that's just a fact. So we're going to keep an eye on that, and we're going to keep reporting on that. But for now, that was what they had to say about that. And, it's a noble goal, and I don't think that it's all about just making more money. I do think that they genuinely want to improve UNM and to improve the experience that students have. But I just think they need to be careful and make sure that it doesn't end up costing the students more than they can afford. So one of the biggest exceptions that is in play with the new rule is the 30-mile radius around main campus. So the way this works, if you want to live with a family member, your parents or another family member or guardian, and that house is within 30 miles of main campus, you can live there. You don't have to live on campus. And 30 miles is a pretty big radius. And so we were curious as to how the university would go about enforcing this new rule, whether they were going to go knock on everyone's doors and make sure that, the student was actually living with a family member. How extreme were they going to get with enforcing that and making sure that, the house was within 30 miles and whether the student was actually living in that house. So we asked Terry about that.
Yeah, and some places do it differently, and some people are very hardcore on it. I would say that's not my intention. And this, if I have anything to do with it, I'm sure I will. The implementation will be based on their permanent address on their application for admission. So if it's a zip code, a location, anywhere within that radius, they won't ever get a correspondence that says you have to live in housing. Mm-hmm. So that's the easiest way to avoid difficulty for people that are from the area to not have to jump through hoops to be out of the exception. Gotcha. And if there's a contention, like, well, maybe they put an address or it's right on the borderline, or it's easily resolved. Essentially it'll be a quick process for them to have the exemption honored.
So as we mentioned before, UNM is hurting for money right now. We just had a hiring freeze for faculty that is based on just the financials, and that there's no more money. And so we were curious as to how much that affected this decision. Did they essentially decide to implement this now because they needed that extra money from extra people living on campus and the extra food that they're buying and all the money that they're spending on campus? Was that a major factor in trying to implement this now? And so we asked Terry about that, and here's what he had to say.
It's a fair question. It's sort of related to that whole revenue thing, that you were talking about. Is it people consider it more of a money grab? This has such a long history of being considered that it's, in good budget times, bad budget times, that there's no way it's solely linked to that, in my view. That was certainly not ever brought to my attention. As I just mentioned, there's, I don't think anyone think that having 200 empty beds filled is a bad thing financially, but just the history of this and how many times it's been brought up during good times, bad times, I don't think it's linked to that directly. And again, for me, we're going to all demand transparency. If there's new revenue in this at some point, it's going off to pay for something else and not invested like it's been promised back into the campus community. That's going to be pretty evident. So I hope it's not that reason, because they won't. At the end of the day, the commitment is that it's going to be invested in the environment here, and they should be able to. They should abide by that.
So that was Terry Babbitt, the head of enrollment here at UNM, and we really appreciate his time. It was really nice to get some clarification on a lot of those issues. So I hope that you guys listening have a little bit better of an idea of what the school was thinking, why they did this, and how it's going to affect you and your time here at UNM, as well as future students. So just a few more details that we wanted to discuss from our own research and stuff. We wanted to see, is this a common rule, mandating that freshmen live on campus their first few semesters? What other colleges in the area do it? How long have they been doing it? So David went ahead and looked into that.
Yeah, so first of all, we went ahead and contacted New Mexico State down in Las Cruces first, and it's pretty interesting what they had to say, because had everything gone with with the UNM's version of the proposal, had everything gone their way, NMSU and UNM would have implemented the policy at the same time. It's because NMSU has plans to implement a very similar initiative in the fall of 2017, so that'll be a year before UNM gets underway with their implementation.
Interesting.
And it does have exceptions very similar to UNM's plan. If you're living with family in the area, if you are 21 or over at the start of term, so a little bit
a year younger.
So if you're a year older.
Oh, is it 20 at UNM?
Yeah, so it'll be 20 at UNM, and MSU
Gotcha.
it's if you are 21 plus at the start of term. So similar exceptions. And I think it's important to note that in one of the press releases that NMSU sent out regarding this policy when it was approved by Regents over the summer, NMSU President Gary Carruthers was quoted as saying, "I think it's the right thing to do for the students." So it's basically going along with a similar mindset that UNM has, that it'll definitely improve quality of life for students, their student experience, especially if they're coming from out of state. Next, we also went ahead and contacted the University of Arizona in Tucson. They don't have a policy in place requiring students to live on campus, nor does Arizona State in Phoenix. So neither of those big Arizona schools in the area have a policy like this. Who knows if they will in the future, but as of now, they don't, and they don't have any plans to implement a policy like this. Texas Tech University, they do have a policy where freshmen must live on campus their first year of school. Again, similar exceptions. And additionally, as far as the proximity to campus, where students can still live at home, they have a little bit of a bigger radius. So if students live within 60 miles of their campus, they're still allowed to live at home.
Wow.
and with parents. If they have extreme financial hardship that deters them from being able to afford living on campus, if they're 21 and over again, so again a year older than UNM is allowing, and then if they have served in the military, they don't have to live on campus as well. We also looked at the last university we contacted was Colorado State University. They do have a policy that says that newly admitted or transfer students must live on campus for the first year. Some exceptions with them is if the student already has more than 15 credit hours that they can apply to their college experience at Colorado State, if they're married, if they're 21 and over, or if they're living with their parents in the Fort Collins area where Colorado State's located. So, and essentially they kind of said a very similar thing, that they believe it helps to assist the transition to college, as well as that students are more likely to be retained if they spend their freshman year living on campus.
Excellent. So, so I mean, it's not unheard of, and it's apparently working just fine at those other colleges. I haven't heard anything about huge drops in enrollment at any of those schools or anything like that with these new rules. So it's not like UNM just came up with this idea out of nowhere. It's happened at other schools.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned how this what might have affected these schools, because I think one of the big reactions we also got from our readership when we published this story last week was, man, CNM is going to see a big enrollment next year. And when you think about it, when none of the exceptions apply to you and you really can't afford living on campus, and you basically can't come up with a good situation and talking with UNM if you're a freshman and you really don't want to live on campus, CNM down the street obviously provides a good alternative.
And I will say that I do know from personal experience. I have a family who works at UNM or at CNM. I'm sorry, and I personally went there for many years. A lot of students who would fit a lot of these exemptions, they already go to CNM their first year instead of coming to UNM. So a lot of students go to CNM at least for a year, sometimes 2 years, and then transfer over to UNM because it is much more affordable to do that, and because they can live at home and they don't have to worry about spending all that extra money living on campus. So there are still options. The main thing that I think that I took away from all of our research and stuff is that the sky is not falling. This is not going to be a humongous deal. And actually, the more and more that I learned about all of the exemptions, the more it just seems like this isn't even really a new rule. It's almost just more of like a suggestion. It's like they want to encourage more people to live on campus, so they're making it a rule that has so many exceptions that it's really not going to affect that many people. It's not going to force that many people to live on campus when they don't want to, because if somebody is in that situation, they can go to CNM their first year and they can avoid living on campus, and then they can transfer to UNM as a sophomore, and then that rule won't apply to them. Or they can, show that they can't afford to live on campus, or they can show how it's a cultural issue, or how it's a medical issue. There's so many ways to get out of it that it almost seems to me like I don't even really understand why they bothered to make it a new policy. I think it's almost more of just like a symbolic thing when you take into account all of these exemptions. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And especially when you think about how many students Terry Babbitt said that this would have affected this year. I mean, not only is that not even a big percentage of the undergraduate population at UNM as a whole, but it's barely even a sizable chunk of the freshman population, of 3,000 or so students that call themselves freshmen and are going to UNM for the first time this year. And so it's really a small number that this impacts in the end. And we did look at we did take a look at doing some of the math and seeing how the potential monetary impact that this could have at the university and how much money it could bring into UNM. So let's say in the fall of 2018, because of this policy, there are 200 students that maybe were planning on coming to UNM anyway. They're from out of state, so the exceptions don't apply to any of them, and they're planning on living off campus, but they're fine with living on campus. So 200 more students essentially translates just with taking into account room and board, which costs about $9,000 for 2 semesters at UNM. That brings in about $1.75 million for the university.
So that's a chunk of change. And right at the moment, we looked into it, and the on-campus living facilities are only at 90% capacity. So there are existing beds that have not been filled, that I don't know exactly. We couldn't get a clarification on exactly how many beds there are open, but perhaps those 200 extra students would fill the rest of that 10%, and there wouldn't even be a need to build more dorms at this point. Going ahead in the future, that could change. They're probably, I mean, if they're going to turn this into a destination university, they're probably going to have to build more dorms. And that's going to cost more money, and it's going to, affect tuition. So these are all things that that need to be thought about and taken into account. We're going to keep an eye on all of it and keep reporting on it. But at the moment, and that 200 new students living on campus number was an estimate that we got from Terry Babbitt, and if those 200 extra students came and lived on campus, who otherwise wouldn't have lived on campus, that's an extra $1.7 million for the school. So it's quite a bit of money. And so I think we should head over to our other interview that we did with our special guest. Do you wanna intro him?
Sure. Yeah, we'll go ahead and talk to UNM President Kyle Biederwolf about the process that the undergraduate student government took to gathering the thoughts and opinions of current students, and in that process forming a recommendation to give to the UNM Regents. So yeah, as we mentioned earlier, we have a guest here with us today on our first podcast here to discuss the living requirement that we're talking about. UNM President Kyle Biederwolf, thanks for being with us. So obviously the students, seeing that they're a big part of the story because they're the ones who are most directly going to be affected and impacted by this new policy that will be implemented. So obviously UNM had a big hand in providing a recommendation to the regents and to UNM administration on their thoughts on this policy and gathering student feedback. So can you tell us a little bit, Kyle, about what that process entailed?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to first start by thanking you all for allowing me to come on and discuss ASUNM's part in the freshman live-on requirement. We took a lot of strategic steps forward, and we had a lot of fun with it, actually. How it first started is it was presented to the freshman live-on requirement was presented to the finance and facility meeting in August, and moving forward, they wanted a student opinion, and the Board of Regents asked ASUNM to get the student opinion. And over the next 3 weeks, we worked diligently to be able to put ourselves in the situation where we were able to get that opinion. And some of the specific ways we did that was that President Frank, Terry Babbitt, and Melanie Sparks all came and present to our ASUNM Joint Council. And to give you an idea of what this Joint Council is, it's ASUNM's advisory council. It is a student representative from every college on campus as well as every resource center on campus, and putting them at a table so we can have a group of students with different perspectives and different ideals of the campus, and put them in one room and be able to bring them issues like this. And we went around, and there were a lot of positive comments, but there were a lot of concerning questions. And the next day, Terry Babbitt and Melanie Sparks came back and talked to our full Senate of the senatorial representatives for ASUNM, and we got kind of the same view, is that we liked the idea, and we understand the ideals that living on campus supports, and we like the idea of having freshmen live on campus, but we didn't believe that it was the right time for it. There were a lot of concerning questions brought up by students at this joint council and at the ASUNM Senate that students were concerned about, and were concerned that they weren't answered all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question. So you guys are in charge. You're tasked with being the voice of the current undergraduate student body, but do you guys have anything in your charter or anything that you're supposed to represent the future students? Because I mean, I think while people who are students right now and who are living on campus right now are certainly going to be affected by this new rule, it's really the people coming in, high school seniors right now, who are really going to be affected by that. I mean, did you talk about that at all? Did you actually try to reach out to anybody who was planning on coming to UNM to see what they thought? Or
So I don't think that it mentions anywhere in ASUNM's charter to think about future students, but I think that the idea of ASUNM is to always leave the campus better than when we found it, and that takes into account looking into students' perspectives in future semesters. Unfortunately, we weren't able to reach out to any high school juniors or seniors that were potentially coming to UNM. But what we did ask is, when we did present the information and when we did inform all of the people that we were facilitating the conversation with, we asked them to place themselves where they were 2 years ago, where they were 3 years ago. And we asked them, based off of all of this information, before you were coming to UNM, where would you be in there? And we understand that the students right now opposed it, and this isn't going to affect them. And I know that Dr. Babbitt has statistics of students that this would actually affect, that he was able to do some research on. But I think we set the precedent with these groups by asking them to think back to when they were seniors, when they were juniors, thinking about coming to UNM and how this would have affected their impact then.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So yeah, I mean, obviously, so this will be implemented two years from now, fall of 2018. So I mean, obviously, you can't predict who will be ASUNM's leadership then, because they might not even be at UNM now. They might be a freshman now. They might be going through ELL, Emerging Global Leaders now. But how in your ideal situation, how do you prepare them as well as you can, seeing that your term is only a year, the senator's term is only 2 semesters? So how do you prepare them as much as they can to help implement this policy with the students in mind? Absolutely.
I think we already started creating a document with all of the student concerns based off of the minutes of the 2 meetings that we had. And I think that it's working with this UNM administration throughout all of my term and encouraging the next ASUNM leadership to work through it through their terms as well. One of the reasons behind changing it from 2017, which was initially proposed to implement this freshman live on, to fall 2018, was that they wanted to hear these student concerns. They wanted to be able to work to fix them. So I know that we have already started taking strategic steps forward as to how we can keep voicing these student concerns to these administrators, and how we can hopefully get some of them accomplished. And I think it's from us, it's just going to be encouraging the next ASUNM leadership. And I think it's us setting a precedent that at the end of our term, we have done so much to accommodate to these students' concerns and be able to show these to the UNM administration. But at the same time, like we are putting trust in the next ASUNM leadership. And I hope that at this point we've started enough conversation. That the next leadership is almost forced to keep the conversation going.
So what exactly were your guys' biggest concerns that you found in your discussions with students, and then just among ASUNM in general?
Absolutely. So we had 3 really big concerns. The first one was the concern of infrastructure. Our students were concerned that there were not going to be enough beds if this freshman live-on requirement took place, and they were concerned about parking spots. They were concerned about all of this different infrastructure. So that was definitely the first main concern that was questioned every single time that it got brought up. The second major concern brought by students is that we are in a very unique transitional phase as the university right now. We have about $200 million currently in capital outlay or in capital projects going on right now, which some of them haven't even broken ground yet. Let's take Johnson Center, for example, that in the next couple years, this is going to be breaking ground. And we're afraid that we're going to mandate all freshmen live on campus, and we won't have a functional rec center, or as functional as we would like it to be a rec center. We won't have all of these functional buildings. There's construction going on all around campus. They're about to tear up Central with the Albuquerque Rapid Transit. There are a lot of timing issues, and we believe that, I say this to the Regents, that we believe that we're taking a huge step forward with all these capital improvements, and we're improving the campus, and we're taking a step forward to becoming a destination university. But if you don't have the infrastructure, we're a little bit afraid that it's going to be an overstep if we make students live on campus. And then the third major concern that was brought up to us was that we found that UNM, it was enticing, it was sexy that people could choose between living on or off campus when they were coming to UNM. We would never want to deter students away from coming and getting their higher education at our university because of this fact. So those were the main three concerns that we heard from the students.
So what do you think, David? What was the one that out of those three that we were most concerned about at the Lobo?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right with the timing thing. When we were gathering and when we were in the stage where we were talking to administrators, talking to students and getting their reactions, and basically gathering information for this story, the whole thing was, these big projects that are going to be starting soon. Those freshmen say that maybe the idea of living on campus doesn't sound too appealing, but they really want to attend UNM, so they do, and they live on campus, but they can't use parts of the rec center, or maybe even all, depending on how that construction phase is at that point in time in 2 years, or even things with the Albuquerque Rapid Transit project. I think that'll be done by then, but other projects like Smith Plaza and other big amenities that they won't be able to fully take care of, and if they want to go off campus their sophomore year, they will, and they will not have. They probably want to have the opportunity to take advantage of those amenities. So I think that's definitely in line with our big reactions here at the Daily Lobo.
Yeah, I just thought that, you use that term destination university that we've been hearing a lot lately. I know President Frank has a grand vision for the school that he wants to make happen, and but then your third point about people, local people, and how they could choose whether they lived on campus or off campus. I am afraid that that this might be it might end up alienating a lot of the people that UNM was built on, which is local people who don't have a ton of money, who choose to stay and go to school at UNM because it's affordable, because they can choose where they want to live, and because, for the money, it's a great value. And I'm concerned about if they keep spending more and more money on all these improvements, and then they make it a rule that you have to live on campus, which means you have to pay for the dorms and for a meal plan, which can be a lot more expensive than living in your own place. That they might price out a lot of those people, and the fact of being so cheap, it will disappear, and then a lot of those students who UNM was built on might not be able to afford it anymore.
And I think the one silver lining from this as well, and I guess I shouldn't say the one silver lining, because there are a lot of silver linings, and I think on behalf of all of us, we hope that this works out, and we hope that the university is in a better spot after the implementation of this. But I think that a shining lining is the 5 exceptions that the university has allowed for incoming freshmen for the fall of 2018. Everything from being married or being over the age of 22 to financial hardship. And when they talk about financial hardship, they talk about how it is a broad definition, so people can come forward and tell their stories. And I think that Dr. Babbitt says it the best, that they're not trying to put anybody out on the street. They're not trying to financially kill anybody. They're looking at this and saying that if a student cannot afford it, if you come forward and you cannot afford it, they're going to give you this exceptions. And that's what Dr. Babbitt has said pretty much in this entire time going forward. So I think that when we are looking at it that way, we need to take the exceptions into consideration and be able to implement those.
Very good point.
Yeah. And I definitely think that all those exceptions are just as important. Each one is just as important as the next, because obviously the big one that a lot of students may focus on first is, well, if you're a freshman, you live with a parent within 30 miles. But yeah, there are those other ones that you mentioned. One of them is financial hardship. So I think the university will be willing to listen to students and work with them to see what situation works best for them and how they can make living on campus work. So.
Yeah. I know from our end, it's just going to be still reaching out and hearing student concerns. I think that's going to be the biggest part on our end. Is just because this passed now does not mean that we are done, and does not mean that it passed. We got the student's opinion. We didn't want it to happen right now, but now it happened and now it's over. I think that we see that silver lining in the fact that the Regents did give us till fall 2018, and us as ASUNM and us as the student body as a whole can still keep addressing these concerns to the UNM administration, and keep hoping to be able to move forward and advance these concerns to where they're not concerns anymore.
And so just to wrap up, since you pointed out that you guys, this is not over for you guys. So if other students who are listening, if they have something to say, if they want to reach out, if they want their opinion to be heard, how do they get in touch with you? What's the best way to engage with ASUNM on this?
Absolutely. So you can always reach out to us on any form of social media. We're under the Associated Students of the University of New Mexico on Facebook. We're on Twitter, on Instagram. But I think the easiest way would probably be through email, which is just asunm@unm.edu. We want to hear student opinions. We want to hear students' concerns. Like I said, it doesn't end now, and we want to keep making steps forward and making sure that in the implementation of this process, that UNM administration is taking students' voices into consideration. Not only did they do it with the acceptance and the passing of this, but during the implementation, that we still have a voice within that. I know that Terry Babbitt and Chris Vallejos had mentioned to me that they wanted to create a committee about the implementation of this. So I know that we'll be looking for a couple undergraduates to sit on this committee as well. But if there's any issues about this, or if there's any issues ever that's regarding a student, we always want them to feel comfortable to be able to come to talk to us, that we should be the avenue that they go down. So you can always email us at asunm@unm.edu.
Terrific.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was ASUNM President Kyle Beederwolf, who's the president for the fall and spring semester of this year. Your undergraduate student governing body leader. Thank you for joining us and providing your insight and insight into that process, and how you got feedback from students, and thanks for providing your contact information there, and thanks for coming in.
Absolutely, guys. Thank you guys both very much for taking this as well, because it is a big deal to the students, so we really do appreciate it.
And you are welcome back on the show anytime.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. And that is going to be our show for the day. Thank you so much for tuning in to this first ever episode of Wolf Tracks, and there's going to be a lot more coming. We're going to be talking about culture issues, news issues, sports. We're going to cover a wide variety of topics on this show, and we would love to have you guys send us some ideas. So if you have an idea of what would make a great podcast episode, if you want to be on the podcast, if you have any stories that you think we should check out, anybody on campus that you think we should interview, who you'd like to hear from, interesting students, interesting professors, just cool stuff going on campus that nobody knows about that you want to spread the word about, we want you to reach out to us. So you can send us an email at wolftracks@dailylobo.com. That's wolftracks, WOLFTRACKS @dailylobo.com. And we will definitely take whatever you have to say into consideration. So that's going to be it for us. I'm John.
And this has been David.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.